I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Council of the City of Springdale for November 20th, 2024. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and then please remain standing for the invocation. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we begin this council meeting, just before the start of holiday season, we begin with Thanksgiving. During this meeting, we will discuss many things, make many decisions, but we never want to lose sight of the spirit of gratitude for living in a nation founded on freedom and the community that gives us these opportunities. As we are in Native American Heritage Month, I also ask that we take a moment to recognize and remember the Native peoples and their families who were the first peoples of these lands, including the Mound Builders, Algonquin, Iroquois, Miami tribes, and many others. May our hearts remember and be thankful for all of our blessings as we conduct the work of the city for the betterment of all of our neighbors. Thank you. Ms. Browder, if you take roll.
Mr. Gleaves.
Present.
Mr. Jacobs.
Present.
Ms. McFarland.
Present.
Mrs. Sullivan-Wisecup.
Present.
Mr. Vanover.
Present.
Mrs. Webster.
Present.
Mr. Anderson.
Present. Council, in your package, you had the minutes for the November 6, 2024 meeting. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The minutes are approved with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next we'll move on to committee and official reports. We'll start with Civil Service Commission. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Council. The Civil Service Commission did meet on November the 7th, and those individuals present were Mrs. Cheryl Darby, Ms. Kathy McNear. Also present was City Administrator Brian Ewell, Assistant City Administrator Stephanie Morgan, and newly hired Human Resources Administrator Renetta Edwards. Following a disposition of the minutes from the October meeting, general reports were updated by Ms. Morgan. Those reports included the building inspector hiring process, firefighter 2 EMT, firefighter 2 paramedic hiring process, the fire lieutenant promotional process, the police clerk hiring process, public works inspector hiring process, and the public works maintenance worker hiring process. These updates included those positions that were awaiting to be finalized, with several of the individuals in the background investigation aspect for the hiring. Within the police clerk hiring process, it was noted that following the background investigation, there still remains one open position. As far as new business was concerned, a patrol officer hiring process timeline was submitted for approval, and within that timeline, the active advertisement was posted on November the 11th, and the application deadline will continue to be open until it's filled. This timeline was approved with a 3-0 vote by the Civil Service Commission. There was other discussions regarding job descriptions for Facilities Maintenance Department, and those job descriptions are being reviewed, awaiting finalization and approval by the Civil Service Commission. And that includes my report. Any questions?
Don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
Yes.
And I did want to say, recognize, I know there's a lot more people in our audience than are usually here for meetings. I believe a big chunk of you are going to be recognized during the mayor report, which should be coming up shortly. We just need to follow our current agenda. So hang tight with us and we'll get to the more fun stuff as soon as we can. And I know there's also probably a number of people here for the mall development as well. Just so you're aware, there's also a public hearing that will be available for that and a chance for you to speak on that, as well as this presentation. That'll be later in the agenda as well. All right, moving along with committee and official reports. Rules and Law, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Finance Committee, Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Planning Commission, Ms. Sullivan-Wisecup.
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission met on November 12th in these chambers, and we had 6 members present. Our first item was Unity Care Group. It was a conditional use at 305 Cameron Road. This was previously the Autism Center, and they have moved to their new location as they had already planned to do prior when they outgrew this one. And the Unity Care Group wants it for a similar use. It's for disabled adults. They would be 18 to however old, and they would provide buses and vans for clients, so there wouldn't be as much traffic like there was with the school, and that was passed with 6-0 vote. And then our second item was a text amendment, 11700 Springdale Pike. It was for the chickens, and there was 0 yes votes, 5 no votes, and 1 abstained. And we did give reasons. This was for the chickens. And the reasons that we gave for our no votes, that could be, we met, the motion was based on the following concerns and questions raised by Planning Commission. Should there be additional requirements for run areas? Concerns with drainage and runoff? Definition of fowl and coop and run? Is there a justification for the quarter-acre lot size? Specific fencing requirements, size and type for the rear yard? Concerns in enforcement, consideration of bees and rabbits, consideration of lot size, coop size, and run, and mobile chicken coops and runs. I wanted to make sure to list all those so that everybody who was unable to attend understood the reason why it was voted no. That was everything. If anybody has any questions or comments.
I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, Board of Zoning Appeals, Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Zoning Appeals met October 22nd at 7 p.m. in these chambers. We had 6 present and 1 absent. We had an election of an officer. A motion was made to elect yours truly, David Gleaves, to vice chair. That passed 6-0 vote. Our first item was BZA application 20240523, emotional support animals at 389 Cameron Road. The property owners are requesting a variance to keep more than 2 household domesticated pets in violation of zoning code section 153.252 F6AI, where no more than 2 dogs, 2 cats, or a combination of dogs and cats, so as not to total more than 2. This application was tabled and then removed from the BZA agenda at the request of the applicant. Second item was BZA application 202-40570, Sunoco image upgrade at 12089 Princeton Road. The property owners are requesting a variance, 1, to allow wall mounting signage without channel cut letters to be located at an existing gas canopy in violation of zoning code sections 153.4592D, which requires all wall mounted signs to be channel cut letters. 2, to allow the signage to extend above the canopy in violation of section 153.459C2E, which states that signs shall not project above the coping and eaves. And 3, to allow a portion of the proposed signage on existing canopy in violation of section zoning code 153.459C2. This application was also tabled. The current property owners indicated that they were only working with 1 vendor, and that vendor did not install channel cut signs. So in good faith, we gave them an opportunity to get with other vendors to adhere to our Springdale zoning code. They will be back at our next meeting on November 26th. They're on our agenda right now. Are there any questions?
I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, Board of Health, Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Health met on November 14th in these chambers. The Health Department has announced the part-time environmental health specialist Pushkar Bhatia began on October 14th. We have had a total so far of 6 COVID cases for the fourth quarter. We also had three resolutions. We had the third reading and voting on those, and those were regarding fees for food service, pool and spa, and hotel motels. Brandis, the public health nurse, gave her report as well. They did have a total of 5 immunization clinics in the month of October, with a total of 282 vaccines being given. One of those was off-site at Heritage Hill Elementary School. And the Board of Health did announce that they still have multiple COVID tests available if anybody wants to stop in during normal hours in the Board of Health, and you can pick those up at no cost.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on to capital improvements. Ms. Sullivan-Weisskopf.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Next, the OKI Board of Directors. For those that don't know, the OKI Board is a cross-regional organization that maintains and divvies out a lot of funding that we use both in Springdale and the city at large. This is large infrastructure projects get approved. At our OKI Board meeting on November 14th, there are 2 items that are worth noting. One, we got an update from ODOT about the 471 bridge repair. You may recall there was a fire underneath the bridge and it caused lanes to be shut down. As the meeting was before, earlier in the week, at the time they had not been able to do in-person inspections yet, but the shoring, but only with drones and robots. Later in the week, they were able to do more hands-on testing and found that the damage was actually quite significant, getting into the core of some of the pillars. So what you might be reading in the news is that that bridge is going to have likely need a bit more work than they were hoping, and it could be out of commission for some amount of time, be it weeks, months, and they just don't have a date yet for it. It is affecting traffic all through the region, and they gave us some numbers that were interesting, but that's still all very much a work in progress. The second item I wanted to share with council and the community at large was a presentation from the Mill Creek Alliance. People might know the Mill Creek. It runs right up 75. It's one of the larger waterways in our region. It's actually 28 miles long and crosses 37 jurisdictions. It was actually called the most endangered urban river back in 1997. Every year we tend to do cleanup activities in our little neck of the woods that's organized through Public Works and the Mill Creek Alliance, where we actually get into the creek and clean up things like pulling up old tires and refuse, and really trying to restore the waterway. I know several members of council have been hands-on in the creek before. It's quite rewarding to do. What was interesting to see is that it's working. The river is improving, and the waterways are becoming more navigable. More wildlife is returning. They've noted everything from minks, beavers, osprey, bald eagles, all the way up in Spring Grove and up in Winton Woods. All of that is, they think, because of the work being done on the Mill Creek. The other item worth noting, because we do divvy out money in that board, was a proposal to add a ramp and public access in Cumminsville as part of the Greenway Trail expansion on the rail corridor. This isn't a place where you could actually put in watercraft, small watercraft like canoes and boards, and actually there's a stretch of waterway in Cincinnati in our backyard that's 4 to 5 miles long, where if that ramp goes in, you could actually go 4 to 5 miles all the way down to the city just using that waterway. And the pictures look quite spectacular. It's very much a nature preserve inside of that canal. So we're really excited to see the progress there. The reason it was brought up in our meeting, aside to share progress, is that there is a earmark in the federal appropriations bill to actually do that work. So when people see things at the federal level and say, hey, there's earmarks, those aren't always bad. In this case, if that earmark stays in, it's an opportunity for us to put in a boat ramp that will really improve our urban core and give that wilderness experience. So we hope that that will pass at the federal level and we can pass that along through OKI. And that's it for my OKI report. Questions, Mr. Vanover?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to add on to your Mill Creek report, Tuesday, I was down by the creek because it's my backyard.
Yeah.
And there were muskrat migrating upstream, so they're back.
Yeah.
I haven't seen them in a number of years, but first I was hoping it was beaver.
They actually had pictures. There were beavers that have made up a little dam area down closer to Spring Grove. And to see minks back in the Ohio River Valley is it feels weird because I feel like we're urban, suburban. The waterway is really beautiful now that it's cleaned up.
Well, that section back there actually is known as Beaver Run, so
Yep.
historically.
Yeah. So it works. All right, any other questions or comments on OKI? All right, we'll move on to the mayor's report. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. First off, we had the Dietz USA ribbon cutting on October the 22nd of this year. The company's expanded into the old Costco building, and there were executives and dignitaries, elected officials from locally around the state, but also from several countries in Europe that made their way across the Atlantic to this event. Huge thing. A great deal of new jobs are going to be created as a result of this. And Dietz is the largest pretzel manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere, so that makes Springdale the pretzel capital of the Western Hemisphere. We also had Veterans Day celebration on November the 11th, and there were a number of veterans that were present to celebrate. Our Springdale Elementary School third graders choir sang at the event. We also had Springdale resident Master Sergeant Dearis Avery from the United States Air Force was our guest speaker. She's a recruiter in the local area, and she did a wonderful job. It was a great event. We also had GE Aerospace had a ribbon cutting on November the 18th, and that is at the old Avon building. And so that building has been around for a while. When I was most of these kids' age, would take a field trip over there when they had Kenner there, and you'd see how Star Wars action figures were made, and they give you a little piece of chapstick on the way out. Now we have the GE Service Technology Acceleration Center there. So it is literally 50 of the most brilliant minds in the world who are working on engines being faster, safer, and more efficient. The technology there, they can monitor engines that are on the ground, in air. They say about every 2 minutes, one of their engines takes off. So it is an amazing, amazing thing that those folks over there are working on. Also got the opportunity to go speak with our fifth graders over at Springdale Elementary School, and we talked about government. We got a couple of fifth graders here today. They had excellent questions, paid attention, and I learned some things from them. They learned some things from me. So that was good. And now for the main event of what we've got going on, we have some soccer teams we want to celebrate, and we're going to have first the Wings team come forward with Coach Connor. You guys come down front and center. Nobody wants to be first. It's all right. Come on down.
It's intimidating up here. I get it.
So this team had an incredible season. They went 7-1-2 and really undefeated. They got through the whole season, and the last game of the regular season, they were just doing some things, just trying to see how some things work out. They were absolutely phenomenal, won their league, qualified for the state title, and they went and they competed on that tournament, played on a really nasty rainy Sunday. I went out there and sloshed through and saw some of that. But they did an outstanding job, and we want to celebrate them. I'm going to let Coach introduce them unless you want to make them introduce themselves. It's up to you.
My name is JC, and I'm the coach's daughter. My name is Mariam. My name is Alana. My name is Caitlin. My name is Allison. My name is Priscilla. My name is Ivory. My name is Jordan.
Let's give them a round of applause. Great work. I'm gonna let you guys have a seat, but I don't want you guys to leave. You guys can meet me in the atrium. I want to talk with you guys out there before folks take off. If people want to sit and watch this long meeting, you can, but you don't have to. But
Is that true for everyone, Mayor Hawkins, or is that just for the
you guys
soccer
got to
team?
stay.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Next up, if we can get Coach Berger and Coach Berger's strikers to come forward. Strikers, come on up. Come on down. So this strikers team had a record of 9-1, and they came in first place and won their league as well. They scored 42 goals this season and qualified for the state championship tournament. They won their first round game, and then they also had to go play in that nasty rain where they lost a close one. But these guys had an excellent season as well. Coach, you want to introduce, or you want to have them introduce themselves?
This is Noah. He's one of our keepers. Gael. Brian, also known as Little Brian. Adam, our youngest player, Jayla, Hadija, Jonathan, Christoph, Christian, and our honorary coach over there who was our keeper coach. Adam was also our other keeper this season.
Let's give them a round of applause too. Great season. You guys meet me out here. I'll give some things to you real quick. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Then make sure there's no questions for Mayor Hawkins. He's free for a few minutes. We'll see you in a
That's
few.
where I'm running out. That's
All
fine.
right. Give them a minute just to walk out. All right, we'll continue with committee and official reports. Next up, the administrator's report. Mr. Yule, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. No report this evening.
All right. Law director's report. Mr. Braun.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Engineer's report. Mr. Riggs.
Thank you. Just two brief updates. So probably seen what was going on Northland. They're actually paving tonight. So the goal is to try to put the asphalt base and intermediate course down on the one side that they've been working on, then switch traffic over to the other and begin working on the other side. So that should hopefully happen by the end of this week. The weather, we'll see how cooperative it is, but that was the goal. Then on the Tri-County Parkway sidewalk project, the contractor started the first week in November. They were projecting it takes about 5 weeks to complete, so early December is when we were expecting them to be completed. The contract completion date is December 20th, so they should be well ahead of schedule. And that's all I had.
All right, I don't see any questions. Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Next, we have the Rental Program Committee. Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Later this evening, I will distribute to the committee members the second traffic report, and we will, a week, 2 weeks, get another meeting scheduled and to move forward, and that would conclude my report.
All right, thank you. And then lastly, the Urban Farming Special Committee, Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. We did receive our information back from the Planning Commission, so we will be scheduling, the committee will be scheduling a meeting in the next few weeks, and we'll review and determine our next steps at that time.
All right. Don't see any questions. Thank you. All right, next we'll go to communications. Ms. Browder, and any communications for council this evening?
No communications. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, next on the agenda is communications from the audience. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience that would like to address council for any reason. You would simply need to come forward to the podium, state your name and address, and you'd have up to 5 minutes to address council. I will note that this is one of 2 opportunities to address council. This is separate from the public hearing that is in the agenda later related to the PUD update in Tri-County Mall. So at this point in time, I'm opening the floor for communications from the audience. Second call. And if you could just sign in, and then, or you can sign in after if you want, but state your name and address, and then.
Okay, yeah, because I don't have a pen.
It just helps us in case there's a problem. We can get back in touch with you.
Okay, sure, I'll be happy to do that. Hi, council members. I am aware you're still working on the legislation regarding the chickens, but I was also hoping you would consider amending the ordinance regarding the maximum number of allowable domestic animals. It's ordinance number 153252, which I believe you referred to earlier. Number 6, which is no more than 2 dogs, 2 cats, or a combination of dogs and cats so as not to total more than 2. I am hoping that you will consider a more modern approach and review surrounding communities and cities. Also hoping while you're reviewing that you would delay cease any pending future citations until resolution. Prior to coming up here, I did contact the Hamilton County Dogs Warden's office and just to see what we had surrounding our area. And since we also reside within Hamilton County, I asked them if they had any type of limit, with their pets. And they currently do not. They follow the Ohio Revised Code. They said in the past, I guess they used to have a 5-dog limit, but that's no longer valid. I also viewed Forest Park and Glendale, reviewing their websites, and I did not see any limit that they imposed. I also looked at City of Wyoming, that in the past they did have a 2-dog maximum. However, they repealed that ordinance back in 2016. I also know, besides the limit, I know that there are other laws in place to help with neglect and abuse, nuisance laws, leash laws, noise laws, etc. I know that those are already in place, but I am hoping that you would consider eliminating or amending the maximum allowable limit. I feel as a property owner where, paying city taxes, property taxes, that we should have a right to use our property as I see fit or as we see fit. Also, I know I've lived here 28 years and I have never seen anybody really go after the pet limit. And so I know it's not really strictly enforced. However, here recently, I have been seeing a lot more citations and bringing it up within my neighborhood, and it usually seems to be more tied to neighborly disputes. So it feels like it's being more used as retribution. And, me personally, I do have pets. I do not have children, so to me, pets are like they're like my babies. So I know other people feel that same way, and seeing that is heartbreaking when I see other neighbors using that as revenge and retribution, and really don't want to have to see people have to give up their pets because of a neighborhood fight. So knowing that within our area, we do not currently have those limits, I am hoping that you would reconsider, and consider amending the law. And I do appreciate your time and your consideration.
Thank you. And could you state your name and address for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Angela Wall, 342 Glen Sharon Road.
Did anyone want to speak on that tonight? Mr. Jacobs.
I appreciate you coming out. This is how, council's supposed to work. They hear comments from residents, and then we react to that. And not to put you on the spot, if you were to suggest a number up from 2, would you suggest a number, or would you just say remove the limit like some of the communities that you've researched?
I haven't really thought much about that. I mean, either way, I feel that 2's too limited. I don't know that I'd think of a number. Part of me thinks without having a limit just because of the surrounding areas. And if somebody's moving in the area, like when I moved here, there wasn't the internet searches where you could search for anything. I didn't even know there was a limit. And so I know myself, I've brought in strays and all of that. So I probably have exceeded that in my past, not so much now. But I don't know. I mean, as far as a limit, I feel like that's hard to say because even if somebody has indoor pets, how are you going to know the limit? And then, and I do know that there's hoarding laws, things of that nature. So I don't know that I'd have a limit, and I don't even know when it comes to like kennel laws or hoarding laws, what that would entail. So I don't really have a set limit, and I still don't even really know how that would be enforced. So.
Thanks again for coming out.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Ms. Wall, I know you were at the BZA meeting, and I appreciate you using the proper venue to bring up that issue, which is coming to council. There are some state regulations, I believe, with regard to maximum limits that are present.
I didn't see any.
Yeah, we had talked briefly with regard to administratively, there may be some, but regardless of that, this is the forum to raise those issues, and folks can mull that over if it's something they want to take action on in terms of legislatively. But thank you for coming out.
No, and thank you. Again, thank you for your time. And yeah, I tried to look at when they mentioned the Ohio revised code. I didn't see anything, but that's a lot of codes, so I don't know. It probably exists.
Yeah, and I will tell you just for your information, so the way that would need to happen is at any point in time, any council member, so the 7 of us, could bring forward legislation or request legislation like that. Just so you know, typically to change like zoning code, it's a bit of a process because of the different steps that are required, like what you saw with the Urban Farming Committee. A change like you're requesting doesn't have to go have a committee formed and like investigation. It's really up to the individual council members if they wanted to do that or felt that it needed a lot of research. But any council member could bring forward a request to make an ordinance change like that. Because it's zoning code, our rules require that to then be reviewed by the Planning Commission for them to give a recommendation on an ordinance. And then that would then come back to council and we could vote on it. So there's just to set expectations, even if everyone up here was really excited to do it, it would still take at a minimum a month or two, even at the fastest, without having special meetings. Just so you know the process. Any person on council could request the ordinance like that. We would then have the law director make those changes. If it needed research, we could do that research. But that's the next step, is if people were so inclined, they could do that at the end of the meeting or in future meetings or outside of meetings, they could make that request. So the reason I mention that is to encourage you, if you don't see traction or you don't see action that you think is appropriate, you're welcome to your neighbors, anyone, to reach out to any of your council members and push them for answers. Just so you know, you have that right to keep it in our field of vision if you think it's important. Okay. But at this point, it's up to council to make an action. All right?
Okay, I appreciate that.
All right. And if you have any questions outside, feel free to get in touch.
Okay. And then as far as seeing the traction, I imagine through these meetings and minutes, that's where you would see it happen?
You could, or you could find a friend. I'm not sure which neighborhood you're in. Springdale is broken up into 4 districts, and they have a district representative that's assigned to it. I think your representative is Mr. Jacobs, and then there's also 3 at-large members that can answer from across the community. But the reality is, Springdale isn't that big. We're all up here, and we're all neighbors. So you can pick whoever you feel you want to talk to. You could reach out and send emails to everyone. You could call us. Whatever you want to do to keep it front of mind, that's your right to do. And any of us could give you an update after the fact. Typically, when somebody comes to council like this and asks for help, we tend to try to follow up, so you don't have to hunt and search to see what's in the meeting minutes, because they tend to so hopefully somebody will be in touch with you and let you know how it's progressing. That's assuming that somebody wants to make that change.
Okay.
All right?
I sure hope so.
Does that make sense?
Thank you very
All right.
much.
Thank you for coming in.
Okay. Thank you again for your time.
All right, the floor is still open for anyone else that would like to address council for any reason. Second call. Third and final call. All right, at this point, I'm closing communications from the audience, and we're going to move on to ordinances and resolutions. First up is ordinance number 57, 2024. This is a second reading and can be acted on tonight. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 57, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Tech Engineering Incorporated for completion of a Safe Streets for All study for the city of Springdale, Ohio. Whereas the city of Springdale, Ohio, the city has been awarded funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administration through the fiscal year 2023 Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program for the development of a safety action plan. And whereas the city needs to retain certain professional services in order to complete the safety action plan. And whereas the city seeks to enter into an agreement with TEC Engineering Incorporated for performance of that work. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Tech Engineering Incorporated for completion of a Safe Streets for All study for the city of Springdale, the proposal. A copy of the proposal is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that the finance officer tax commissioner is hereby authorized to pay Tech Engineering Incorporated an amount not to exceed $123,310 for completion of the Safe Streets for All study as outlined in the proposal. Section 3, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and if its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 57, 2024. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council.
Ms. Albel-Meiskub.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance number 57, 2024 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next on the agenda is a public hearing linked to ordinance number 58, 2024. We will have the second reading of it after the public hearing. At this point, I'm going to open the floor for comments or feedback related to ordinance number 58, 2024. Again, just like with communications to the audience, if anyone would like to speak on this item, you'd simply need to come forward to the podium, state your name and address. You need to have up to 5 minutes to speak to council related to the ordinance itself. And for what it's worth, I realize that we haven't seen the presentation yet, but the way it works is the public hearing happens first related to the ordinance. If you have questions or feedback, it's an opportunity. This is before the ordinance happens. I know that the developers are here as well and will also have an opportunity to do the presentation if they would like to. They can do that inside of the public hearing or during our deliberations. That is up to them. So at this point, the floor is open for, the public hearing is open related to ordinance number 58, 2024. Second call. Third and final call. At this point, I'm going to close the public hearing related to ordinance number 58, 2024. Mr. Jacobs, ordinance number 58, 2024. This is a second reading, and we have had a public hearing. When you're ready.
Ordinance number 58, 2024, an ordinance approving a major modification to the Tri-County Mall planned unit development and approving the preliminary development plan for the property located at 11700 Princeton Pike. Whereas the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio Council has previously approved the Tri-County Mall planned unit development, PUD, and whereas the applicant has submitted an application for a major modification to the Tri-County Mall PUD and preliminary development plan at 11700 Princeton Pike to allow it to demolish a majority of the existing mall with the exception of 2 parking garage structures and 2 existing outlots. And whereas at its meeting of October 8, 2024, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the proposed major modification. And whereas a public hearing was held by council on November 20th, 2024, pursuant to the requirements of the zoning code. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, the major modification of the Tri-County Mall PUD and preliminary development plan, which has been reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission in accordance with the exhibits listed and described in the attached Exhibit A, which is incorporated herein by reference, is hereby approved, subject to the conditions of the Planning Commission, including A, staff, city engineer, and city planners' recommendations and considerations contained in their reports. As a PUD, this shall include staff, law director, and city's approvals of the covenants as necessary. B, final development plan, which shall be reviewed at a later date. Section 2, that this council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this ordinance were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, that the clerk of council is hereby authorized and directed to notify the applicant of council's action. Section 4, that this ordinance shall be effective from and after the earliest period allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance number 58, 2024. It is a second reading. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. At this point, I'm open the floor for questions or discussion from council. Did the developer want to make a presentation? Mayor Hawkins, are you aware of that? I haven't spoken.
Yes, yes.
So if the representative for the developer would like to come forward and present the information while council is deliberating, this is your chance. And again, if you just state your name and address for the record.
Hi, good evening. My name is John Rickert, R-I-C-K-E-R-T, and I live at 9073 East Kemper Road, Cincinnati. Brian, how are we doing with the technology?
We're going to get your presentation booted up here, Jeff. All right.
I used to think that that was a large TV until the one behind it was installed. I guess it's having technical issues. It makes the one in
Well,
front
it's
seem a
kind
little
of-
less impressive.
We were at my office earlier today, and we have a similar board, and I was in that technology quagmire. Mr. Mayor, council members, and city administrators, we're excited to be here, as well as members of the community of Springdale. While they're doing this, one thing that occurred to me as the council proceedings were going on and as we interacted with city staff is how absolutely professional Springdale is, from the leadership of Mayor Hawkins, Andy Kuchta, Brian Ewell, and the people that we've interacted with have been absolutely stellar and have guided us through the process. The other thing that occurs to me is something that you said, Councilmember Anderson, which is Springdale's not that big and we're all neighbors. And what resonated with me was the sense of community and the soccer players and your recognition of the teams and how wonderful that is and how it's great to celebrate our children to the ordinance about pets. And these are things that are important to people. And one of the privileges that I've had in being part of this development team is to understand the values of the development team. So now that the presentation is up, if they could just put it on the splash screen. My name is John Rickert. I'm President and Executive Managing Director for Lee & Associates Cincinnati. Lee & Associates is a commercial real estate firm, and the services that we provide are services that are integral to bringing a major development like City Center Springdale to fruition. So we provide property management at a very basic level. Somebody has to take care of the mall and the mall site while it's being developed. We have a maintenance team. We have a very extensive accounting services group to help us with both our development accounting as well as the accounting that's associated with the investment. We provide marketing for the property and help to put together packages like this, our social media presence, and then most importantly, as we have shifted from the previous development model, which was a master development to a syndicated development model, we're out marketing for co-developers and parcel buyers. I'd like to introduce some of the members of the development team that are here. And most importantly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sunil Gupta. And it was really my privilege to get to know Dr. Gupta when the prior iteration wasn't going well and the needs of the community weren't being met, and frankly, the needs of the investors and the lenders weren't being met. And he came in and said, you know, we're going to do this thing differently. And what Dr. Gupta has shown me is that he has pride in his real estate developments. He has a sense of community, and he's just generally a good human being. And I mean that sincerely. And those are qualities that I think are really important in projects. And what we're doing here is you've got 76 acres. Mayor Hawkins has talked about the size of the community and how important this development is to the community. And it's important that our leadership for this is made up of good people and people that respect the interests of the stakeholders, take those interests into consideration, and try and work in a cooperative manner. Mitch Sima has been retained to be our leader, and Mitch is our Director of Development. He comes with a wealth of experience. He's an Air Force veteran, and Mitch wrangles everybody. So we have, you know, the army of the lawyers, we have the architects, the engineers, all putting the pieces of this together, and there are a lot of pieces, and it takes a tremendous amount of coordination, both for the private body, but as well as the public body, and we need somebody to lead that, and Mitch is that guy. Barry Bear is our architectural and development consultant. Barry has been with this project since the mall was in its infancy. And I don't think that there's any human being that has impressed me as much as Barry has with his intimate knowledge of this 76-acre parcel, how it was constructed, its many iterations, where it is now, and how we frankly decommission it and then take the site forward to the next level, to the vision that we all want for the Springdale community. Our splash slide is just a Google image. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to orient people. The left of the slide is north, and that's 270. The up portion of the slide is east, which is the railroad. Kemper Road is to the right, and Princeton Pike is obviously to the west and to the bottom of the slide. So that kind of gives us a sense, and of course the mall is the white rooftop in the center, 1.2 million feet for those of you that don't know. And then to the north and west, we have 2 existing structured parking garages which are able to accommodate somewhere around 3,400 auto parks, and that's huge. It would be disingenuous to stand here and say that our team is well aware that this is the second time that the mall development has been attempted. I've been in real estate almost 40 years now. This is not an easy thing to do, and really good teams in the best of times can have difficulty pulling something like this off. We can talk about many of the reasons why the first iteration didn't succeed. We can also sit there and say, wow, what an opportunity for this team to learn. And if it didn't work, what lessons can we take away from that, and how can we approach it differently this time? And I think all of us feel fortunate that we have this opportunity, and that frankly that we had the opportunity to learn from the activities of the first iteration. We acquired this property, and the we in this is AV Cincinnati Land Acquisition LLC, led by Dr. Gupta and a group of really courageous investors that came in, and yes, they do want a return of capital and they do want a return on capital. But these investors have said, we're going to do something meaningful and we're going to have a major project, and this is going to be really, really cool. We are committed to working with the city, with the community, with Mayor Hawkins, and with the city administrators, and we intend to create a very special live, work, play environment that exists today and exists for many decades after we're done. We acquired the property on July 19th, and what I think is important to say in a public forum is just because you don't see something happening physically. I mean, it's cool when things are demolished and we can make announcements. There is a tremendous amount of work and hours and hours and hours of coordination and meetings that take place to make something like this happen. So first and foremost, we had to acquire the property, and that got accomplished on July 19th. We created the development plan that we submitted for the major modification to the PUD. That development plan was very clearly a product of the city's input and involvement from a staff level, from the mayor's level, from the economic development director's level. And we tried to listen, and we tried to incorporate the hopes and aspirations that the Springdale leadership has for the site into what's financially viable and what we can execute on with a public lift. We were able to terminate the Me Cozumel lease. They're building their own site. What's significant about that is that there are no more tenants in the 1.2 million square foot mall structure. We've begun decommissioning that mall. Some of that involves making it as safe as it can possibly be. We've done that in cooperation with Springdale fire officials as well as the building officials. And part of that is taking out a bunch of combustible materials so that that is no longer a hazard. That's been completed. We've begun the process of turning off the utilities. Obviously, it's in our interest and the community's interest that we spend as little money as possible carrying them all so that those resources are allocable to those things that actually move us forward. We've completed the exercise in understanding the costs of demolishing them all. That includes environmental remediation for things that have accumulated since the late 1960s. And thanks. And we are in the process of applying for the demolition permit for that, as well as the 2 auto centers. And we expect at least one of the auto centers will be coming down shortly. Barry has begun and has actually a significant amount of progress done on architectural standards. And I'll pause on that for just a moment because you've got some controlling documents and processes that help us through the development. And some of that is what I would term the public lift, which is your tax increment financing, your Community Reinvestment Act. Those things are in place, and Springdale put them in place, and that's really positive. We then have to have development agreements so that those incentives can be activated. We have to have architectural standards. We have to have covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And we have to have a new community authority in place. Our lawyers are working actively with that. I want to acknowledge Andrew Spohr with KMK, who is Springdale's Public Finance Counsel. He has been a wealth of information and just a hugely positive individual for our attorneys to work with. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and advance a slide. These are the entitlements that have been approved. The reason to show this slide before we show the images is to touch on what is available to us. And not all of this could be built because it would just simply be too dense. But what it does do is it allows us some idea of what can be on the site, what the city has approved or what the Planning Commission has approved, and how the site might look as a community within a community. So we have our multifamily residential use up to 2,600 units. I don't think that is achievable. The plan that I'm going to show you probably has between 1,200 and 1,300 units on it. That is certainly achievable. Maximum building height, 10 stories, will probably never go that high. Cost of construction would be prohibitive. That's a lot of mass, but maybe. Retail, entertainment, and restaurant uses, 30 buildings, 600,000 square feet, and maximum height of 2 stories. Again, that's an awful lot, and the plan that I'm going to show you is not going to show that. But the plan that I'm going to show you does have retail, entertainment, and restaurant. And we have, and I love this term, and this is an Andy Kuchta term, but aspirational uses. And that's your economic development guy telling us we want to be what we are and better. And that's a really positive message, and that's something that we've latched onto as a development team. And I thank Andy for the language and for the inspiration. Fitness uses, I could use to lose some weight. Office uses, yes, we want to have office space. We want office space as part of our communities. Office is very, very challenging right now. And my vision for what office might look like on this site has to do more with medical than it does traditional offices. Hospitality uses, we've gotten a lot of traction from a marketing perspective. 2 buildings and 400 keys. The plan that I'm going to show you shows 2 buildings and about 250 keys. 5 stories works, and in both in scale and what it does for the hospitality developer. And then additional uses, probably not, but maybe, and there's some things that we can think about, and we know that we have a bullet there that we would come back to the Planning Commission and check with Planning Commission if we had anything that was exotic that we wanted to look at. So here's the big plan. And what I'd actually like to do, if it's okay, is can I leave the mic and just walk over there and I'll speak up. And if you can't hear me,
Can you hang on just a second? We actually have a mobile mic. If you, just so we get it for the recording, in case there's questions, I want to make sure we get your words right.
testing.
Yep. That's better, thank you.
All right. So this is largely what was submitted for a major mod to the PUD. And again, where we have Z16 or Zone 16, that's going to be in the southeast quadrant of the property. We really don't have anything currently programmed for that. Barry has it listed as an 8,500-foot retail center. You obviously have it backing up against the railroad track. Z15B, 126 key hotel that does come with some conference ability in that, which is currently something that the city could use more of. A 21,000-foot retail center. The model that we're using for this retail center is the Stone Creek Toast and Berry and Athletico Center that's on Montgomery Road in front of the Twin Lakes store. What Barry's shown here is he's shown an outdoor dining patio there. And then, of course, parking. You would enter from the north and moving to the south. The hard corner is super, and what we envision for this hard corner is really the gateway to the development. So this is something that needs to be impactful. We'll work with the city where we have some community identification signage here. Obviously, lots of architectural lighting, landscaping, things that give us a sense of presence and really make the development pop. Z11 and Z9 are two existing buildings, and we're all familiar with those. You have Starbucks, Men's Warehouse, and Chipotle here, and then Outback Steakhouse here. These tenants have leases, and those leases are enforceable, so we'll continue to renew them. These businesses do well. So my firm uses Placer AI, and we can track how these businesses perform relative to their peers by number of visits, which is a little spooky. If you don't know what Placer is, it tracks your phone data, and it anonymizes it, but it can tell how many visits people are making to a site. So anyway, these are doing pretty well. This here, Barry has it programmed to be an 8,500-foot retail center. I kind of view this as two quick-serve restaurant type things. And potentially, if you, again, are familiar with Montgomery, there's a Taglio's Dunkin's. There's something of that nature that looks good. You've obviously been there. His office is on top. There we go. Hotel wrapping around here in 2C. Now, this is our north parking structure. It's 2 levels. Barry showed us a design that I think is incredibly cool, where the tenant or the guests enter here, they circulate. You've got a very urban, kind of hip Chicago, New York style lobby. We have this program for medical office over here. This northern piece, I think, is well utilized and it's well programmed. It is in a flood zone, so we're limited with what we can do up here. We're showing sand volleyball, a dog park, obviously parking, some community space, and the bar and grill. On the west side of the development, we have Z5A, which is our east side parking garage. And now we start to get into sort of the core. And what I want you to focus on here is the sense of community. Multifamily, we certainly will have our retail uses that are consistent with multifamily. Pickleball is kind of the thing, but let's call that more sportsy right here. more retail, and obviously parking to service this. You've got your multifamily along here. We have some public restrooms that are programmed in here, and we're calling this space City Center Springdale Commons and giving it some identity. Barry has it bookend with a venue structure and a family-friendly play zone, someplace, and we envision that it would have some security so the little guys can't just, go running off. And then you have this activated field where we can do lots of different things to and include, you've got your kids in here playing soccer. We all like sort of the March 1st brewery concepts, garage doors here, opening out, so you've got a pedestrian. We've already got the Dora in place for this, and Springdale helped us with that. We have an entertainment venue on Z14 to the west side, and then multifamily, Z14A and B. So that's how we envision this coming together. We've gotten a lot of traction. What I like about this plan and what I like about the development is that it would be a shame and it would actually be foolish to try and demolish the parking structures. This is extremely valuable and it's in good shape. So then you sit there and you say, okay, I've got the 76 acres. I've got these really cool parking structures. I've got all this parking. How do I work with that as opposed to work against it? And this development plan allows the parking structures to remain, creates pedestrian bridges that are cool for the multifamily, add elevators with some security, and all of a sudden you've got this great community thing where it's convenient for people, it's parkable, it's safe, it's walkable, and it's activated. So that's the vision for the development. And then I think I have just a few more comments, and I'll close up. No, I think I actually covered everything. So Barry's going to come up and give us some color, and I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, and that helps us all envision what it can become. But for my portion of this, what I'd like to close with is that I love the energy of this community. We're all neighbors, we're not that big, and we have a chance to do something here that is really, really good, that's a legacy project that enables this community to go forward and to envision, to realize the vision of the current leadership that is thinking generations forward. So I think that's cool. So thank you for your attention to this. Barry, do you want to take over?
If you're just going to get the podium, you don't need the mobile mic. You don't need that if you're just going to stay at the podium.
Okay, I'll just.
If you could state your name for the record.
Yes, I'm Barry Bayer. The last name is spelled B-A-Y-E-R. And I live at 9530 Cunningham Road, 45243 here in Cincinnati, Ohio. You should have put a timer on John. I always put a timer on John. So just, I'm reminding you now, Jeffrey, just do that for John. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the development itself, show you some pictures that capture the tone and the character of the site. But first, I'd just like to go through some 3D images of the site, okay? So within the last week or so, we've kind of developed these 3D images. This is in a software package that allows us to continue to progress along as we develop the facility. So right now you just see large boxes. In future looks at this, or when you take a look at this, you'll be able to see the articulation of the skin itself, materials, and so on and so forth as we develop it. So as you can see, we're standing south of the mall, looking across Kemper Road and into the facility. The darker gray boxes that you see on the right-hand side and the very at the top are the parking structures, okay? 2,600 cars in that major one, on the east side. So what we try to do, as John kind of pointed out, is we try to focus the residential around that parking garage. That's a huge amount of parking that we have to be able to utilize. So the best way to utilize that was with our residential people that'll be there all the time. What's not shown in here on this display is there are bridges that connect from that upper deck into those three masses. It's 20 foot from the ground to that top deck. That'll work out perfectly. It'll let people walk from that top deck directly into the residential units. Anybody that parks on lower levels would ride elevators up and then into those. We haven't worked through how we'll segregate all that parking yet, but there'll be some segregation of that parking so that residents there will always have a place to park. So those three buildings then are up against the parking structure itself. Then all the way to the back of this piece, maybe I'll flip another slide here, are the two buildings that John talked about on that parking deck back there on the far north end of the site. One to the left would be the hotel, one to the right would be the medical office building. Both are planned to be like 5 stories tall, 5 to 4 stories tall, 125 keys in the hotel, and then the medical office building, again, could be 5 stories tall. And what you'll start to see now is that as we develop those 3 residential buildings, we're also creating this larger park area in the middle, as John talked about, this open space. One of the things in the zoning code that we'd have to adhere to is that 15% open space as well as 15% green space in the zoning code. So I've done calculations on all that, and I'm meeting that currently. It is a little challenging, to be honest with you, to try to fit everything in and get stuff as little dense as possible. But that darker green area in the middle there certainly gives us a lot of ability to have that open space in the center of the plan. On this side of that park, again, would be more residential units that we're working on with parking associated with them, because we've looked at how far it would be for a person to walk from the garage itself back to those residential units, and we've kind of calculated that out based on other locations here in the city as well as other locations, and we don't want that to be too far of a distance. So it's about 200 feet from those bridges into that parking structure that would get you undercover and into the buildings themselves, okay? And then John pointed out the hotel up on the top right, the 20,000 square foot retail piece that would somewhat mimic Stone Creek on Montgomery Road, and the corner pieces. So with that, we'll show some images here that basically begin to show the character and the tone of the center itself, what we're trying to pursue on the 76 acres in the development, both from a structure standpoint, site components, open space, and landscape, okay? So the key to all these slides is the little key plan down here at the right. Again, north is to the left on that, and highlighted in red are where these pictures would somewhat apply as we go through the slides, okay? And then the words on the right are just the words that stimulate the conversation as to how we'd handle things. So, you know, when you're looking at that model before, you see some massive structures. They are big structures. So what we begin to do is architecturally, we'll look at setbacks like these elevations show on the top, balconies, how we handle that cornice, how the building meets the sky, how the building meets the ground. Canopies, projections, and material colors across these buildings begin to break up that building and not make it look so massive, okay? Lots of transparency in the building, so there's lots of windows, especially down at the lower level, which I'll talk about later where the retail is, as well as up into the units themselves. And then I talk about pattern. All these things are kind of architectural terms that we use throughout our discussions. But just look at how the pattern of the windows go on that lower image and those fins that come out. Setting up pattern and rhythm in those elevations really breaks down the elevations and gives its character to the site and how the corner is expressed. Obviously, you can see in that lower image definitely how that corner is expressed with a large graphics on actually of the address of that building. Similar to that, here's another corner example. Balconies, setbacks where it goes back to create balconies, how the building is higher on the corner, that cornice that's actually low that wraps around the building that ties all the volumes together. All those things are important, and will be talked about in the design standards. So we kind of make sure that whoever gets here doesn't create something that's not within what we want to do, okay? And really, the way I've set those design standards up is before these people come to you, they come to us. And we make sure it's fitting the design standards as well as all the zoning code information. Another example of balconies, the cornice on this building, the corner how it's expressed, and again, material change, creating a base, a shaft to the building with a siding, and then a cap on the building. This is a slide, again, of the multifamilies talking about the features. There would be pools located in the center of these elements, and you saw that on the perspective shots. They'd be pet-friendly, fitness would be there, and there'd be common space where people could actually bring in somebody to have a meeting in one of those common spaces and schedule a meeting or a celebration of some sort, birthday party, anniversary, whatnot. Those common spaces would exist in every one of the buildings. As I mentioned before, we would connect these structures to those residential buildings, and they would be card code access type of thing. We wouldn't allow the other people parking in those structures to go through those residential buildings. But just thinking about the safety of them right now, you know, looking at technology to increase camera coverage in them, the help buttons that you see down in the lower right, and then of course, increasing the lighting in them. Right now, the lighting in is the lighting that's been in there, and you're smiling, the lighting that has been in there since 1992, I think, was when that was built. So we would clean all that up, refresh the inside, and create what I call a wayfinding package. That is graphics in there that allow you to find your car when you couldn't find your car, you know, if you came home after an evening and you couldn't figure out where it was, where you had put it type of thing. So, and then also on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see treatment on that garage. How we might, you know, you've got these residential people that are gonna be up against the garage. Now remember, on the big garage on the right-hand or the south side of that garage, it's only 20 feet of garage. But as you move to the north, it gets taller as the elevation changes on the site. There's 40 foot of topography change from the south side of the site to the north side of the site. So we look at some way to put new elements there that would be able to shield and make the building more attractive than just looking at a parking structure. Those parking structures would have new stairs, new lighting, brand new fire protection system, graphics, as I mentioned before, and elevators, okay? We really see that hotel as more of a business hotel, but again, the same sort of massing features that I talked about in the residential would apply here. You know, you can see in this hotel, it's got a cap to it, a top that's a little bit more, just an interesting, a point of interest in it. That cap looks like, maybe like the cap that you see on the tower down in Kenwood as you go down 71. How they handle that orange projection on it to create scale for the building and tie the building together, and again, patterns in the windows, lots of transparency in that hotel. And that hotel is probably a light breakfast type of hotel, light meals, things like that. It's not going to have a major restaurant in it or anything like that. We really want whoever comes to that hotel to go into the core of the development and eat, drink, and shop in the core of the development. So you can see the little, at the end of the open space where the red dot is there on the map, this would be a place for a great brewery and a restaurant. John kind of mentioned that it would open up into that park area. Now, it's not going to be like a Mad Tree where you've got history there, you know. You got a lot of floors that have been worked over in manufacturing building and brick walls. So we're going to have to create the right type of brand for that location. So I see something like this. It's a little bit more modern, a little bit more upscale, but a place with lots of glazing, lots of video screens in it for sports, entertainment, bars, a bar there, and light food. And very adjacent to the park. So in the summertime, you open up those garage doors or you open that thing up and it spills out into the park. So there'd be outdoor dining on the north end of that brewery. Talk a little bit about that far northern district. And as we talked about before, you know, the one part of that is there's 6.9 acres of this site are in the 100-year floodplain. So we can't put anything in that region that's going to flood at the end of the day. We have to go through FEMA and the Corps of Engineers and everything to get things approved. So we've always been looking at container-type structures that would open up, like this one's showing with a canopy and a front end to it that would open up, become a bar, light food, burgers, those types of things. And all that would support a pickleball or whatever we end up with, pickleball, sand volleyball, whatever we end up with in that region, and a dog park. And I show the bikes here because this could be, it's really hard to see on this image, but this could be the start of a bike path that would connect into the bike path that you've all been talking about. You could park in this area, get on the path, and run along the railroad tracks. There's a perfect location there, and then jump onto the bike path and either head east along Kemper or west along Kemper Road. Just a little bit about the open park. Obviously, it's not going to be as big as what you see at someplace like at Summit. In fact, we need to make sure that that's just the right size, enough size that it's not overwhelmingly too large, that's a waste of space for everybody. It has to be at the right size so it makes the right message. So again, what you're seeing in this image I selected was, you see towers on the right. They would be both on the right and the left, so you would actually have containment of that park. And the orientation is really important because it's a long axis in the north-south direction. So you're going to get a lot of sunlight into that park, but not blaring sunlight in the evening on a summer, on an evening on a summer night. So working through that of how that would look is still something that we're working on. It'd be a great event opportunity. Views from the multifamily would be spectacular into them. We'd wrap it with retail, and then it would be a very heavily pedestrian atmosphere in there. And the design guidelines start to point out where there'll be parallel parking along roads, where we won't allow parallel parking along roads, and all those things, again, all the parking and everything has to tie back to the zoning code, which is really well written. I don't know who put that together, but does anyone want to raise their hand on that? That's a well-done document. Another shot similar to that. Again, this park is a little bit tighter, and there's roads on both sides. Right now, we just have a road on the one side of our park. It's on the east side, not on the west side. So those are things that we're still kind of working through and talking about. But one of the key things about that is all that retail along there, as you can see in the lower image, very, great locations, lots of transparency, and lots of things to draw people in and out of those locations. So a little bit more about the circulation. I really like that image in the lower right. I can see that that's how we're going to set this up, where you'll have some of those retail people will allow people to come out and dine in front of that retail piece, either through opening up garage doors or windows or just outside eating in those areas. Notice in this one on the lower left, they're actually eating on the other side of the circulation path. A very European thing to do, Latin American thing to do. So that might be incorporated in here. And the crosswalks will be very important here. They will project out as shown here so that they cut down the traffic and make it really safe for the pedestrian to cross at those crosswalk locations within that core area. It's very important. From an entertainment standpoint, we're not going to have Taylor Swift concerts here. I don't think. I saw somebody here before with a Taylor Swift sweatshirt on. She left. We're talking about small concert type things, venues going on, and they might only go on a Friday and Saturday night, or they might be on a weekend night sometime and only play to 9 o'clock or something, because you don't want to disturb the residents that would be up in that tower up in there. And then someplace, one of the things that, like a splash pool that we're showing, something to attract people there in the summertime and have fun with their children. I think that Sunil's a big skater, because he's talked about this like 10 times to me in the last 2 or 3 days. He keeps talking about some sort of winter sport out there, some sort of skating rink, which we could easily do in that area that I'm showing there in red. They could have a skating rink in there, lots of holiday lights, a big Christmas tree out there. Those types of things we'd look forward to doing that to really, again, make sure that space is used all through all the seasons. And then one thing that we talked about, there's a parking lot where that red spot is, and everybody wants to put a building there, and I keep saying, well, You probably need some of that parking to support the adjacent buildings, but it's also a great opportunity to have a weekend farmer's market. There's one on Montgomery Road that happens from spring all the way into fall. It's probably going to close down now. It is packed, every Saturday morning from 8 to 12. And an event like that, you can utilize that space quite well because that parking won't be used for the brewery unless people are drinking between 8 and 12, and I'm not sure if they're doing that. You can put a farmer's market there during those summer months, sell fresh produce, flowers, craft things, whatever comes to that location. And then also you could do food trucks in there at special times. You know, have tacos, barbecue, specialty drinks, all those things for the Dora, you know, to energize the Dora that would be there. And again, it would not be all the time, it would be sometime. Someone messed up the cut flowers in 12 to noon on there, and nobody's gonna, it's probably a different timing on there. We did talk about townhouses. That's still in contention that we're talking about where those townhouses would be. Townhouses on the site do reduce the amount of multifamily that we can do, but we're thinking of ways of how we'd adjust that to try to create some townhouses there. We think that that's a different market and it's necessary for the development. So right now we're showing those townhouses. And whether those townhouses have peaked roofs on them or flat roofs. And again, it's all the same thing that I talked about before. What's the roof profile look like? How do balconies, cornices, canopies, and projections work? Materials and color. You'll see on the top image, they move from a siding, a hardy board siding or cement board siding, to a brick, back to a hardy board siding. And then you can see in the last set, the pattern they develop. Siding, brick, siding, brick, siding, brick. Those are the kind of things that will make the development special in the area. Okay? I think that's it. That's it.
All right, thank you for that. And just for the communities, as a reminder to everyone else in the community and also for council, what we're looking at tonight is not a final development plan. What we're voting on tonight, what's being considered, is a modification to the plan unit development and approving the preliminary development plan. There's a lot of steps that happen after that. This is just a step in that process. So things that were mentioned, things like the development agreement, the architectural standards, the covenants, the community authority, even the DORA still needs to be put in place. These types of things would all come after the fact. You'll notice that in the plans that they showed, they're white blocks. They don't have business names attached to them yet. Those are still in development. So what the developer is asking council's approval for, that planning recommended approval for, was the preliminary development plan and the change. The old plan that was approved retained a lot of the structure that existed at the mall. The big change, the reason we're seeing this tonight, is because it's a different approach completely to this development, where they're tearing down the majority of the environment and then proposing this outward in development, where along the outer ring, developments will happen as the marketing, as the development grows, and then each of those individual developments would come before planning and go through their review before it comes to the city for review. So what we're approving tonight is the concept, the idea that the outside, this development, the demolitions could then start, development agreements could come to terms, we could figure out the rest of the financing. Just so everyone knows where we're at. There's a lot of things that happen, and even after that, there'd be phases to the development. The developer has mentioned several targets that they have for initial people they want to work with. They can't do that until we get past this step. So with that reminder, we're still in questions and deliberations for this change. Mayor Hawkins, did you have some comments?
Thank you, Mr. President. And just piggybacking on that and a few things in general. Everything President Anderson said is completely correct, and what we really appreciate, particularly for the public, I know council and folks that are on Planning Commission have got to see some of this information already, but it's great to see the overall vision so everybody can see where folks are trying to go, but there are still many steps to go through that. It's also important to note, just piggybacking on something that John had said, in terms of them working diligently and want the public to know, because there's times when folks are going, why doesn't the city just make that thing happen? It's not that easy, but it's important to know that literally every week, if not every day, the city's doing things with regard to this site. I know John is living sleeping and breathing this thing on a regular basis. I've had numerous meetings, sometimes in person, sometimes in Zoom. And so it is a constant thing, and City Council and Planning Commission have been constantly making themselves available, giving input when there have been developments that have taken place. And so it's important that everybody understands that everybody is working diligently to get this site developed and activated. We are here talking about this change in the PUD, and it's important to note from the prior one, the other one was far more dense in terms of housing. And this has a concept that's more of a mixed-use idea. I'm sure the school board will be thrilled with there being fewer people on the site, but this still does reach the goal that my predecessor, Mayor Webster, had, that I continue to subscribe to, that I subscribe to as a prior council, and I think this council subscribes to, that we are trying to increase our population. And this site, along with another development in the works, will get us to where we're trying to be in the next 3 years or so. So it's important with regard to that and revenue that would come therein. The other thing is, as noted, this does have the mall removed, which is important. And the other one was going to keep different facets of it. This gives far more flexibility with regard to the development and does give more opportunity for green space and meeting space on a clean slate versus having to work around that giant monstrosity. So I just wanted to say that overall, there's been great collaboration. There's been give and take, lots of meetings with John and Mitch and Sunil and Barry, and everybody has an idea, and they have a goal, and we have a goal as a city and a vision, and I think those things have done a nice job meshing together as we're going forward, but we still have a long way to go. Thank you.
All right, we're still open for questions from council. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. This might be a question for Mr. Rickard. We also have an engineer here. Not being an engineer, can anybody speak to the lifespan of those parking structures? It was mentioned that they're in good shape. Is there an average lifespan for structures like that?
So that has to be studied, and as part of our due diligence, we will have an engineering report on those. Generally speaking, we're programming for a 50-year life. And with some remedial maintenance now and major improvements or major maintenance every 5 years, it should outlast my lifetime anyway. But yeah, you wouldn't go through this development if you didn't think that those structures would be there for the long haul. It's a good question.
Thank you. I did have one more question. You had mentioned that lessons were learned compared to the previous, project plan.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to maybe the biggest mistakes from the first plan and how you have learned from those mistakes with the second plan?
So I wasn't part of the team. I think.
Mike, you're welcome to come up if you'd rather answer. Obviously, and I should have said this before, so technically council's deliberating. You're not required to answer these questions. If you'd rather defer, you're more than welcome to do that.
I'm
but
fine
if you have the
answering.
answer, we'd love to have it.
Sure. So the mall that's there today has, what was trying to be happening before was we could not get enough density in the mall itself, residential-wise. Even though it looks really big, you couldn't get enough density in it. The other issue is it's 110 feet from the concourse or the main mall all the way back. So you were going to have units that were over almost 50 feet deep, way too deep. That's not a good strategy for residential at all. They were way too deep. There's going to be a lot of dark spots in them. And the other issue was, originally, before I got involved, they were trying to put a second floor, another floor between the second floor and the roof. Well, you couldn't do that. The structure could not take that load. If everyone knows, that whole entire second floor is hung off 110-foot trusses. The floor load would have gotten way too much, and you couldn't do that. So the structural engineer that's been involved with this project since the get-go, his name is Randy Wilson from THP Limited. I talked with him. We said that was a no-go, so then we got back to these 110-foot long deep apartments divided in half, you know, with a corridor. It just didn't work. That's why that got out, and we need to get more density. We were only getting 350 units in the mall itself. And in addition to that, we were trying to renovate Macy's and the old Dillard store. The Macy's store is a concrete structure built in 1969. I have the drawings if you'd like to see them from my old firm with all the old partners that I knew. It was going to be a very hard demolition to turn that into a donut or even a C shape. Dillard's was built in 1990. It is light gauge metal framing with ephes on the outside. That was going to be an easier one to do, but we're going to also have to core the center out of it. All those things just caused the demolition cost to expand. And we weren't going to be able to do it. So that's why basically tearing it all down is the worst thing, best thing to do. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice.
Thank you. Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all for coming out. Great presentation. Talked about history of Tri-County and keeping it in the realm of our environment. And forgive me if I just did not hear you mention this, but the soul of Tri-County was a grocery store.
Oh, that's just what.
And Tri-County Mall had Kroger, a major grocery store. And you would stay there all day with mama. Go there and go everywhere from there. And another thing I'm concerned about is the marketing of different restaurants and retail that we don't have in this area. Papa Do's is here in Springdale. There are people who drive from Indiana, Columbus, Kentucky, because there's not one in the area. We have several restaurants that are north, east, and south, and west of us. What I'd like to see is the marketing for things and entities that we don't have here. That's just totally different, and including a grocery store. So, thank you.
Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. It looks nice, but that view right there, the one thing that comes out, just jumps at me, is the size of parking fields. It's like you have little buildings, and then we have this massive parking field. We have that today. And you can hit just about any retail store, and they will all tell you they're overparked. You know, they've got these massive fields, and I think that, you know, whether it goes green space, you know, that's all impermeable surface area. That drives my neighborhood, that rainwater goes underneath 275 and ends up in my backyard. Just looking at that, I mean, that is disappointing to me. I understand you have to have parking, but you know, can we reconfigure? Can we take a look at numbers? And I know you don't have tenants yet, and that will drive some of this, but that is disappointing, to be honest. And you know, I not only piggyback on what Mr. Gleaves was talking about, named restaurants, but also variations. We don't have, there's 3 or 4 levels of restaurants that are not existing in Springdale. And this would be a great opportunity to get those in. And I know Andy is, working diligently back there. He and I have had conversations along those lines, but just the first glance, that's the huge parking fields just jump right at me, and I hope we can do something with that.
Let me address the parking fields first, Mr. Vanover. I'm losing my voice as I talk. The hotel that's shown here that John talked about, that's 126 keys. According to the zoning code, you need one parking spot for every room in there. And you need a parking spot for the maximum number of employees at one shift. Okay? That layout, I know it's hard to believe, but that meets that exactly. Okay? The 20,000 square foot building to the left of that, the exact same thing. I put a white napkin restaurant in there, a fast casual restaurant in there, and then a retail. And I balanced the square footages out, and all that parking is dictated by the zoning code. And one of the things that we've talked about as a team is we don't really want people walking across that primary loop road to get to parking. We want to be able to, those lots need to be able to park to the zoning code. So I don't know, unless there's a little alleviation you can give us. And remember, we haven't done anything with that corner lot, so that parking field might not be that big. There's probably a lot more green space here and open space than there is there today. I'm not saying that that's, and also you have two massive detention systems on this site, which take that water and let it go, release it. So those help with your flooding of any streams or something downstream. So, and then the second part about marketing other groups in here. Has anybody ever been to Easton up in Columbus? Fantastic development. Yarmir Snyder that's his development. And we went up there and talked to him probably 3 times in the last 3 years. He actually offered to help us with connecting us to retail organizations that are well beyond, that are coming from the West Coast, the East Coast, Dallas, Denver. So we definitely want to take up on that opportunity to see if we can get those in that inner core area. Okay? Thank you.
I think they provided you a bottle of water that'll help you out because you might have more questions. There's a bottle of water at your seat to help you out. I will tell you, though, for what it's worth, Mr. Vanover's comment about the parking fields, I did have a follow-up question on that. Do you expect those parking fields to remain at that level in phase 1, or during demolition we'll be making them green space to begin with? Because if you're only going to plop a couple buildings to begin with, that's a lot of concrete that people will be staring at for a long time.
So all these parking lots along Kemper Road, and I was showing Sunil this earlier today, from the southern side into that loop road, some of the topography changes 16 feet. But we have to set a building pad on that sloping topography. Sean Riggs knows that. So we're going to be doing cut and fill calculations to straighten that out. So as we develop those parking lots will be tore up and reset back in. I think that answers your question. Whatever we demo, we'll put back in green grass until it's, if we demo the whole mall, we'll put it back in grass until that time. Because as we develop, if we develop from the north to the south or the south to the north, well, it's going to take years, you know that, so we want green grass there. Very similar to Summit. Summit, that whole corner of Summit at Reed Hartman there and Pfeiffer Road is going to get developed. Now, they had the advantage, it was already an airport and there was a lot of grass there, but they're going to develop that eventually, so right now it's all in grass.
But they had temporary uses before it was developed, right? So there was some infrastructure put in there during that development phase that allowed the community to use it, be it greenfield or park space or soccer fields or something that allowed it to be activated before it was sold for later use. So I hope that you would look at those types of temporary uses and not just have it staked off as a dead zone.
Well, we think that once we start developing that core, that park will start taking shape. You know, you got to get vegetation, trees built in there and stuff, so you start to get some growth on them, because they're not going to be a lot of canopy to them yet. So we'll start that early on in the process. We might not put the venues at the end and the end in yet, but then we'll do those in the next phase. So we have a big park there for people to use, at least to start things off. It's going to be a phasing, multiple phasing.
Right, and I will share that I do echo Mr. Van Hoof's concern about the sheer number of parking. I understand your comment about it being required by the zoning code, but understand with the PUD and the ability we have, that's not a hard and fast rule for developments like this. Those are set up and written as if they were a standalone item and lived by themselves, right? So the parking for the space. As you mentioned, like with the food truck idea and the farmer's market, there's periods of time where not all that parking is used at the same time for that business. And we can make intelligent decisions and partner with you to take away some of that concrete jungle that I think is a direct attack against the community feel that we're looking for.
We would love that. We'd love more structures. We'd love to get that more dense. I know it looks kind of shallow when you look around that perimeter. I completely understand that.
Yeah, and that's not to undercut the conversations you have with the administration. That's just two council people's opinion, as I think we would be open to ideas to reduce the parking.
Perfect.
All right, Ms. Webster, I think you were next.
Well, thank you. Mr. Cleve stole my thunder, but I'd like to know about a grocery store too. The old Tri-County, the Tri-County Mall, had Kroger's in there for years. And it was very nice to go in there, shop for whatever you wanted. Tri-County, we went to McAlpin's or Shelto's then. And then if you had to get something for dinner or just pick up a couple groceries, you could run into the grocery store without leaving. And it really was a plus. I'd really like to see a grocery store.
So we love that idea. A large format grocery store like a Kroger really consumes a ton of land, and it would be very difficult for us to create the sense of community with that. And there are probably other places in Springdale that are more suitable for that really large format grocery. Something that's a little bit smaller, like a Fresh Time, that's a lot more feasible on this site. We're simply not that far along on the project. I'm doing the marketing for it. We're talking to all of the players that would be in that space. So I don't know exactly what your vision is, but if your vision is for a Kroger, probably not on this site. It's just not going to fit.
It wouldn't have to be a Kroger. Something where you could run in for maybe a loaf of bread, a half a gallon of milk.
Of course, yeah.
A lemon, anything like that. If you needed something like that to add to your dinner that you were cooking home in the crock pot.
You bet. And with that density of residences, the type of boutique that you're talking about absolutely would be something that we would market to, and there's space on the site for that.
To save somebody from, getting out, driving out of there and then going to a store and
sure.
Save us time.
Yeah, and you want a community to be walkable. You want to be able to, frankly, to get your toilet paper or whatever else that you need for your home without making a major trip. It's a great idea. And
it was wonderful back in the day with the Tri-County Mall.
Well, there were a lot of things that were wonderful, and
yeah, true.
But the Santa and the we're coming up on the holiday season, so yeah, I appreciate the comment. That's really good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I will caution you though that there is an Aldi directly across the street from your site, so I wouldn't want to be putting us in a situation where we're competing with them. They had moved down from Forest Park down the road, and has been a very successful move and a good partner to Springdale too. So it would need to be a complementary type grocery store, not a competition, is what I encourage you to be careful with, because Aldi there does very well. All right, Ms. Sullivan-Wisecup.
I have one comment about the grocery. If you go downtown along 3rd Street, where the old Union Central building goes, there's the street Broadway. Go in that building. It's the old entrance off of, I think it's Broadway. I'm not sure if it's Broadway or Sycamore. I can't remember. Inside there's apartment units in there, and inside there is a store exactly like you're talking about, where you can get bread, milk, eggs, cheese, fruits, produce. It's not big that you're not going to get laundry detergent there, maybe in a small quantity, but you can buy things in there. That would easily fit in one of these large residential buildings. Could be in that center one, so people could go to it in the middle.
So more like a
It would be nice for
bodega.
the apartment people too that live there to be able to run down or take an escalator or
That's
whatever.
exactly what that one's for. is for the
Yeah, that's
apartment
good.
building.
We need that.
Yeah, so more like a bodega as opposed to a full grocery store. Ms. Sullivan Weiscup.
Thank you, Mr. President. Those were really good questions for a final development plan. This is the major modification of the Tri-County Mall PUD. I'm glad that we have some ideas of when they do go to planning for that we have ideas for what everyone up here wants. But I just want to remind everybody that this did go unanimous, a vote of 7-0 at Planning Commission, and I asked for your yes vote on this to go forward. Thank you.
Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure who can speak to this. I mentioned earlier, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a developer. My understanding from the first plan and why it went south wasn't so much structural or construction related. I felt like it was a financial situation. They did not have the pockets to finance even the initial phases. Now, if that's an incorrect reading, I'm welcome to be corrected. But what's your confidence level on financing this project?
So I think in the first phase, that group could not have started that at a more inauspicious economic time, and interest rates moved wildly against them. And so I don't know that it's quite the same comparison. I can tell you with the way that the center, or with the way that the development is currently capitalized, we have sufficient resources to go forward, and we have sufficient resources to carry it for the long haul. We have discussed that we do need to do a syndicated development model, and in my portion of the presentation, going around the periphery and then activating in particular that Z14 parcel area, those things are important to us. It's also important to us that we have the tax increment financing, the CRA incentives, and those would be important to any developer. And then obviously the city's support, which has been absolutely forthcoming and gracious in terms of our grant applications and those things that a development entity needs to do when we're taking down a structure as massive as a 1.2 million square foot mall. So all of those things factor into the development. Some of what has changed is that the development team has a degree of financial sophistication as well as legal expertise to navigate a multifaceted capital stack to make this happen. I also think that we have some deeper pockets, but that would be my answer to that.
Thank you.
All right, still in deliberations, questions, or discussion? All right, not seeing any others, I did want to thank you again for coming in and providing the information you did. I know it's a big project, and I'm sure, assuming this goes well, that we'll be seeing a lot more of you. As you've seen, Springdale will be a good partner to you, and please use the resources as you have been. We're available to help, and we always have ideas. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Brian, there's copies here for everyone, most everyone. You don't get one, Brian, but if you wouldn't mind distributing them, we don't want to do it right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, you got some more to do.
That's fine. All right, again, thank you for traveling down. I hope to see you soon. All right, so with that, Ms. Browder, if you'd poll council on ordinance number 58, 2024. This is for the PUD major modification and approving the preliminary development plan.
Mrs. Sullivan Weiscup.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance number 58, 2024 passes with 7 affirmative votes. And again, thank you for coming down, and we hope to continue along in fruitful journey.
Have a nice evening.
All right. We'll continue working here with the rest of ordinances. All right, next we'll move on to ordinance number 59, 2024. This does have the emergency clause attached. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 59, 2024. An ordinance declaring certain city property as surplus property and authorizing the sale, disposal, or transfer of said surplus property and declaring an emergency. Whereas council has determined that certain property of the city is no longer needed by the city for municipal purposes or useful as such, absolutely or temporarily. Now therefore be it ordained by the council of the city of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1. Consistent with Article 8, Section C3 of the Charter of the City and is permitted by Ohio Revised Code Section 721.15, the items listed on the attached Exhibit A owned by the city are hereby declared to be surplus property no longer needed for municipal purposes or useful as such, absolutely or temporarily, and that such property may be sold by internet auction or otherwise, transferred, disposed of, or traded in by the city, and may have the value credited against the purchase price of other personal property to be used by the city. Section 2, that the city administrator is hereby authorized to dispose of said property in the manner specified herein. Section 3, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to enable the city to dispose of the property at the earliest possible date to allow for some of the property to be used as part of a trade involving another transaction that must be completed within deadlines to preserve the quoted price.
Council, you've heard the reading of Ordinance 59, 2024. It does have the emergency clause. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved in second. Questions or discussion? See none. Ms. Browder, if you poll council on ordinance number 59, 2024.
Mrs. Sullivan Weiscup.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance number 59, 2024 passes with 7 affirmative votes. Next, we'll move on to ordinance number 60, 2024. This is a first reading. Mr. Jacobs.
Ordinance number 60, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute a subrecipient grant agreement with the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, related to the 2024-2026 Hamilton County Community Development Block Grant Request Program. Whereas Hamilton County, Ohio, the county, has applied for and received federal community block grant CDBG funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, under Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, as amended HCD Act, Public Law 93-383. And whereas the city established the 2024-2026 Hamilton County Community Development Block Grant Request Program, the program, using HUD CDBG funds in 2024, and issued a request for applications for the program. And whereas the city of Springdale, Ohio, the city, applied for and was awarded funding in the amount of $78,000 as part of the program. And whereas the city desires to enter into a subrecipient grant agreement with Hamilton County for federal fiscal years 2024, 2025, and 2026 of the Hamilton County Community Development Block Grant Request Program. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to execute a subrecipient grant agreement with the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, for participation in the 2024-2026 Hamilton County Community Development Block Grant Request Program, the agreement, and to execute any and all other documents and agreements consistent with acceptance of the grant and participation in the program. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2. Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3. This ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the first reading for ordinance ordinance 60, 2024. Are there any questions or discussion this evening? Mr. Ewell.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a reminder, earlier this year, we had a couple of discussions about this block grant, a couple ideas that were floated before council, kind of the list that we prepared to submit for the to the county for this grant specifically. This was the only project that was selected for that award cycle. So we had, I think, 5, 6, maybe 7 that we proposed in various years, but unfortunately weren't successful in those other ones. But we were successful in making some improvements down at the community center for our seniors. So we're looking forward to getting that project started next year.
All right. Any other questions or discussions about this tonight? All right, seeing none, we will see this on our agenda next meeting. Ms. Sullivan Weiscup.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion to go into executive session under Article 2D1 of the Springdale Charter to discuss economic development issues.
Second.
Moved and second. Questions or discussion? Administration, are we expecting action out of this executive session? And do we need to invite anyone else back or just council? All right. So, Ms. Potter, if you poll council on moving to executive session.
Mrs. Seldon Weisskopf. Aye. Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster. Aye. Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Council is in executive session. We will return. All right, council has returned from executive session. We'll now move on to old business. Is there any old business that anyone on council would like to bring forward tonight? Ms. Webster?
I'm going to bring up something for old business. I would like to know when we are going to put this chicken issue to bed. We have been working on this almost the entire calendar year, and I was under the understanding that once planning met and come up with whatever, and they have all these no's, that we weren't going to, that it was going to come to council and we were going to vote on it. Now, why has that not happened?
Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. President. My understanding of the process is planning came up with some concerns, and I would think the committee should address those concerns.
Well, when do you think we can expect that on the agenda?
The-
Before the end of the year, I would hope?
The committee has to set up a meeting. Ms. McFarland and I will set up that meeting, and then we'll go from there, but I can't make any promises on timeline.
You know, I don't think this is fair to the people that want the chickens, nor do I think it's fair to the people that don't want them. And we're just dragging this out and dragging this out, and I don't think it's right, and I think it's wrong. I really do. And I think we need to settle this one way or the other.
Ms. Sullivan-Weiskopf?
Thank you. I know that for the part of the planning commission, we just met about it last month, so I didn't expect to see it now because we just.
Well, you're on there, I didn't.
Yeah, because we just had our meeting last week, so I don't think they've had enough time to put it all together for us yet, because our meeting was just last week, so.
I know it was.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that's part of the reason why we don't have it
Well,
today.
do they have any inkling when or anybody have any inkling when we're gonna vote on it?
Well, I think you heard from the report, the committee report, that the planning committee met last week. You'll recall when we had it before council, we sent it to planning, and the advice we got from administration and planning was they wouldn't be able to have it due to schedule their notice period until the following meeting, which was last week. So as I mentioned to the resident who came in and talked about zoning code, any zoning code changes because of the handoff between teams can take several months to actually work through. Those aren't trivial changes. I heard in the committee report that they were planning to have their meeting in the next week or two, which is as soon as you could have it, since they just got the report like a few days ago. Now, I will tell you that because of we do have a requirement inside of our ordinances that requires when we get a negative review, a negative opinion from Planning Commission, City Council is required to schedule a public hearing on that item irrespective of what the committee decides to do. Because separate from the committee's action, the committee can send ordinances or do their job as they see fit. Because council sent an item to planning, City Council is going to be required in our next meeting to schedule a public hearing on that item. So our ordinances do what you're asking us to do, which is make sure we take action. The way that it's set up in our ordinances is in our next meeting, we have to schedule a public hearing on that item. Now, if before then, the Urban Farming Committee gets together and decides to advance legislation, we can do that all at the same time and move it quickly. But we're only following what's required by our laws. So at our next meeting, we will set a public hearing.
Well, it won't, you won't, so it won't be on the 4th, that's our next meeting. And then it won't be on the last meeting in December, that's when we got committee reports and everything else.
Well,
a public hearing for that would be really bad, I think.
Well, I can tell you that I don't know, the deadline to have an item on the agenda is Friday at noon the week before the council meeting.
Okay.
So up until the Friday, the committee could, up until the Friday before our next meeting, which would be, let me look at the calendar and give you exact dates.
Still November 30th.
So by November 29th at noon, the committee has the opportunity to meet anytime before then and still be on our agenda using the regular process for our December 4th meeting. So that gives them at least almost, so it gives them all of next week to do that too. Now, if it's an urgent matter, anyone can bring the legislation forward. So the committee has been asked to do the work. If you want to bring forward an ordinance, you're welcome to do that at any time.
I do.
Right, so you can take that up with the law director, or when I
Can't understand. You say it to me?
when we get to legislation and development, you have the opportunity in a council meeting to ask for legislation.
Okay.
You could also do that outside of it, but that would be separate and maybe in conflict with what the committee's been asked to do. So the committee's been asked by this council
So
to
is
do
that
that
going to
work.
be a time delay because of what you just said, the committee hasn't met?
Well, so we voted as a council to establish, we set up a committee for that. And the committee's working, and they gave a report, and they can decide what to do next. If you don't feel like that's working fast enough, you have the opportunity, just like any other legislator, any other council person, to take action. And you can decide what you want to do.
And that would come in the form of requesting an ordinance be brought in.
So you can work, you as an individual council member, you can always request an ordinance yourself.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the entire council has already asked the committee to do that work, so you'd be doing that in conflict with the rest of council.
So tell me what I have to do, because you're saying 2 or 3 different things. I request an ordinance from the administration?
No, administration doesn't create ordinances. Council members do, and they do that either in a committee or as an individual council member, and you can work with Mr. Braun to do that if you think it's appropriate.
All right, and then that'll be on the agenda December 4th?
If you want an item on the agenda, if you remember 2 meetings ago, we updated our council rules. You'll notice in that section 30, there's how you bring forward legislation. And as an individual council member, you can bring forward any legislation you think is appropriate.
Okay, I know I can do that, and I'm doing that. I want that on the agenda December the 4th, the chicken.
Well, that's assuming that you have an ordinance prepared.
Please?
So maybe it'd be better if you take that offline with Mr. Braun about how to best
All right, I'll talk
bring
with
forward
Brian.
an ordinance with Mr. Braun.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, that's a quandary with the way we had a first reading, then we sent it to planning, and we are anticipating it coming back. If the committee decides to change it up, we've had a first reading.
That's right.
So in procedural, Mr. Braun, you can clarify, we would have to act on that ordinance first, correct?
No,
Or
so-
at least vote to make amendments.
So one thing I'll tell you, and then I'll let Mr. Braun also add. So earlier in this week, I'd given advice to the committee about what their options are, and that was in concert with Mr. Braun. They have several options that they could pursue at this point. The fact that there was a reading of an ordinance that we then voted to send to planning does not require us to act on that ordinance. If you, again, the rules of council that I mentioned to Ms. Webster in terms of how legislation gets brought forward describes that. So the committee can bring that, can request to have that ordinance added to the agenda for our next meeting if they so choose. They can have it brought forward as it was read before and then make amendments in the meeting if they like, if they think that that would address the issues that planning brought forward. Or they could request that it not be brought forward at all. Just because something has a first reading doesn't require it to have a second reading. It's just, and it goes back to the rules that we set up. Mr. Braun.
The only thing I would add is that because it's a text amendment, it's slightly different than regular legislation. It's required to go to them. We had a first reading before it went to them. So it's now in what we're going to call the text amendment loop of what those requirements are. And interestingly, our ordinances don't say when council must take it up after they've had the public hearing. So there is not a time requirement, but as was brought up by the President of Council, if it's brought forward, it could be voted on. It's also possible that the Urban Farming Committee will decide to withdraw it at their meeting that I think they're going to schedule between now and the next meeting, or they could revise it, and then it's going to have to go back to planning.
So we have a public hearing on the ordinance that Planning Commission worked on, voted on. Then they come back with an amended, then are we not going to have a public hearing for that? Because we're cheating the public for comments.
So a public hearing isn't required for that. We've had a public hearing for that ordinance. If we've had that ordinance, then we've had the public hearing. We are able to have that at any point in time. So if we talked about this before with this amendment, because there was so much public interest, we wanted to make sure the public had an opportunity to share their views. So I think there's two questions that you're bringing forward. One is what's required by the law, and obviously we defer to Mr. Braun on that. And the other part is what's our responsibility as council members to make sure that the residents are being heard. And we can do that. So if it's a question of, I just don't want to get ahead of the committee. The committee just received feedback a few days ago from planning, and there was a bunch of items that they talked about. So the committee should have an opportunity to review that and decide what their next course of action is, be it withdraw the ordinance or amend it. And that's completely in line with what our charter rules allow, what our rules of council allow. So right now, as it stands today, we've had a reading for an ordinance the committee proposed. We voted as a council to send that to planning. Planning has then, after their required time, sent us back their views, and they declined to recommend it. Because of that action, council is required to have a public hearing of that. Because we sent a zone text amendment to them, we're required to have a hearing on that amendment proposal. So we will schedule that at our next meeting. Between now and then, the committee will have an opportunity to meet and decide what they want to do, if they think it's appropriate to amend, or if they think it's appropriate to create new legislation, or just advance it as is and let us vote on it. But that's what we set up, that's what the committee is going to do. So the expectation, and it's the same expectation I set with them earlier in the week, is my expectation is if they don't meet in time or we don't have action, that we will have this on our agenda next meeting. That's the expectation I set, but I do defer to them. If they have a meeting and say, gosh, we need another week or two to work through some of the changes proposed, I think we should let them do that.
So we're beholden to the...
I can't, if you could bring your mic down.
So we're beholden, the council's beholden to the urban committee. Because they have to have a meeting.
I don't know.
I would think we'd want to start the new year off with all this old business out of the way. And I think this is really kind of like shirking our duty. We're not doing it right. We're not getting it done. That poor woman from Cameron's been up here 15 million times. And here we are, and she has no answer. It's not right. It's not right to treat these people like this. I don't like the way this is going, and I didn't like the way it was going all year. And I didn't like the way the committee was formed with nobody had an option to say, I'd like to be on the committee. No, nobody even, I would have liked to have been on that committee, but nobody asked me, nobody told me. You had your mind made up who you were putting on there. And it wasn't me, for sure. And I would have had it done by now. And I just think we've got to get it out of the way, one way or the other. What if somebody gets a bunch of chickens for Christmas and they're not allowed to have? It's just the way I feel about it. I don't like this dragging these things out. So I will like to have that on the agenda, December the 4th. Thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think you've gone over the different options of where things sit. I did want to say this, though, because it's important, and I know that, short of Mr. Vanover, who's been here for more than 2 terms.
More than the building.
It's important to understand process-wise, because sometimes these are things that are happening for the first time for folks. And so process-wise, the part of this that may be confusing for individuals publicly or even for elected officials is usually if there's a text amendment, it would be something that would get referred to Planning Commission to go through. Now, council has every right to have a committee, form a committee, have a committee go look at it, generate legislation, can do that all day long. But so folks understand what normally happens is it would get referred to planning. Planning would then go through and do all of that stuff. They could make a subcommittee. They could have additional people that aren't on planning on that, what have you. They could have people that like chickens, that don't like chickens. They could have council members that aren't on planning commission. They could have all of those things. They would work through those things, and then they would give their opinion to council. They do the work for council, give council their opinion with regard to it, and council could then do whatever council wanted to do with it. Council has the ability to do exactly what it did, but that's why some people may be confused to go, well, there was a reading, and then it went to planning, and then planning went through it, and the issue with planning going through it then, which, you know, I preface Ms. McFarland, Mr. Jacobs put in a bunch of time, energy, and effort with regard to it, and I appreciate that. I think residents appreciate all the efforts that went through there. But the analogy is like if I go to Mr. Vanover and I hand him a basket full of groceries and say, please make me lasagna. And he goes, well, this isn't the pasta I would use, this isn't the sauce I would use, this isn't the regatta I would use. Well, planning is getting everything, and they may have some different viewpoints. And despite all of the time, energy, effort, and work that's gone into it from the committee, sort of like they said, they had some different questions. Doesn't mean anybody's right or anybody's wrong. They just had some different questions. So I want to make sure everybody understands process-wise. I spent a bunch of time on Planning Commission. That's why some folks may be confused with the process, because it's been a little bit different. But what council's done is well within council's ability to go through and do. So I just want to make sure everybody sort of understands that. Thank you.
Yeah, it is worth mentioning the feedback from planning for this specific ordinance does exceed the amount of detail that they've asked for in other zone text amendments. So there's new people on both sides, both on council and in planning. So some of that is a learning curve. I do push back strongly about the effort that was used by the committee. I know that Ms. McFarland and Mr. Jacobs spent a lot of hours, engaged a lot of the community, got a lot of good feedback about people's positions, and took that feedback to heart and then made changes to the legislation. So that process, that iterative process, takes time. One of the challenges with committees like this in our world of sunshine laws and open meetings is they can't just go to a coffee shop and hammer it out, right? They have to schedule a meeting and have it in person and open to have each of those discussions that have to be advertised separately. So that process just takes time. So I do want to say I appreciate the work that Mr. Jacobs and Ms. McFarland did. It was not a trivial amount of work that got them this far. I think they're very close to the finish line, and I don't think that it's unreasonable at all to 5 days after a planning commission meeting to not have an answer. So I push back on that. Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. My concern is that you form a committee and they're not allowed to give a final report. I figured that a committee, in a process of having a committee, you would have to give a final report. That's my concern, because I feel in my tenure that there will be another committee. And that committee and other committees from this point on should be allowed to give a final report. That is the process that I envision for a committee. I'll leave it at that.
So, and I'll tell you as a process question, that is well within their scope of work. So if you go back and look at the scope, and this was again in the note that I'd sent out to them to remind them, the committee's task was to evaluate that section of code and come back to council with either a recommendation or sample ordinances. It was not just make chickens legal. The zone text that's there now is chickens are permitted in Springdale. They just have, and they have none of the restrictions that the Planning Commission is talking about. So I think we do need to go back and look at that to see if we need to fix it. A report could be the committee's final work. It doesn't have, it could be, hey, based on what we're seeing with the feedback we're getting from planning or from other council members, that this isn't the right time or there's not enough support for it. But they can still just create that report and say, this was the feedback from the public that overwhelmingly, like 3-to-1, supports a change. This is the feedback from planning that says, we need to make sure our zone text, when it involves animals, includes all of this level of detail that none of the other communities around us have. That's fine. So that's what the committee was tasked to do, not just answer a question for someone who lives on Cameron Road. That's why it's the legislative process that's doing that, not just a BZA request. A BZA request could just make it legal for a person. We're talking about changing the zone text. So the committee's task includes the report you're talking about as a package, and that may or may not include an ordinance. That feedback comes to us. Then when we get that feedback from the committee, if Ms. Webster or somebody else says, well, you didn't recommend an ordinance, but I think it's required, they're welcome to do that. You could do it yourself. Say, I don't think this goes far enough, or it's too restrictive. That's your change. So that's all well within the committee's work. What you're seeing is just this is just how, that's the process that we have for council to do this. Ms. Sullivan-Weiscup.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do want to thank the Urban Farming Committee. They did do a lot of work. Most of the feedback came from people who came to the public hearing and spoke, and also our 2 people on planning that have been there, one of them for over 45 years, and the other person, shoot, probably about 30. So we had very experienced, very knowledgeable people who've done this for many, 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 many years. So they know when we're looking at a land use, what kinds of things are needed and not needed. I do want to clarify one thing on the quarter-acre lot, because I know that I've got a lot of questions about that. The main thing that planning was saying was, if you allow it for quarter-acre lots, though most of the quarter-acre lots will not allow for chickens with the setbacks and the other rules, there were things like that. So that's an example of something that maybe they didn't think about when they were looking at those parameters. And that's why they go to different places that have other views, and then it comes back to us. It's all a process. It goes slower than molasses 95% of the time. But at the end of the day, would you rather be quick and sloppy? Yeah. Or would you rather take longer and be either what we want or nothing at all? That's just my take on it.
And I remind everyone that we're not litigating the ordinance itself during old business, just whether or not we want to bring forward or get an update on it. Ms. Webster.
I am not condemning Mr. Jacobs or Mrs. McFarland. No, I'm not, Megan.
No, I'm agreeing with you. Yes, you're not.
Oh,
I was agreeing with you.
I am not condemning them. But this has been going on almost this entire year. Now, if they couldn't handle it or couldn't do it or couldn't find time to meet, then you should have had somebody else on there. And Planning Commission did not recommend that. Am I correct? Now so why are we not voting on it? I know when they met. I know it was just a week ago last night. I know all that. So why are we not voting on that ordinance when Planning Commission didn't vote on it?
Again, the deadline for requests to come forward for the agenda is Friday at noon. We didn't have it by that time. So the committee got feedback.
Excuse me, just a minute. You didn't have that vote by Friday last week? They met on Tuesday, and you didn't have their vote on Friday to get the agenda ready?
Ms. Webster, this isn't a debate between 2 people. So what is your question? So we're in old business. What are you trying to find out in terms of old business?
Well, I'm new on here, and I don't know all these rules and regs with the meetings and the time and all that stuff. Maybe somebody should explain it. I don't know. I have trouble understanding you, Mr. Anderson. It's not that you mumble, it's that you speak so low, and I just have trouble. And I can tell you a lot of people do, not just me. And I don't mean up here, I mean out there. So I just don't understand it, but I still would like to vote on this December the 4th and get it out of our hair. Thank you.
All right, well, we've received that feedback. Mr. Jacobs, did you have a comment, or is this new business, old business?
The intent of the committee is to take planning's feedback and do something with it. And there was not time to do that before tonight's meeting. I feel like it would be disrespectful to planning to just ignore that report. Michelle and I haven't had a chance to meet yet. That's the only thing I can tell you. I understand that you want to vote soon, but I'm not willing to just take Planning Commission's report and ignore it. That's where I am in my seat. Thank you.
All right, so I think we need
The
to.
problem with that, I agree with you, Mr. Jacobs. However, I still think now you have 2 weeks before the meeting, the next council meeting. And I know you got to have it done by the Friday, the 29th or whatever it is. Maybe you could, how long would it take? You've already had a couple meetings, haven't you? And discussed a lot of stuff, like amount of land and how many animals and so forth and so on? Haven't you had that discussed? And the yard, or the acreage?
All right, so at this point, I'm going to ask that we move on from the topic. You've made your point that you would like it to happen soon, and I think they've heard that.
All right.
We're not scheduling meetings for the committee as part of old business. Is there any other old business that anyone else would like to bring forward to council this evening? All right, next we have new business. Is there any new business anyone on council would like to bring forward? All right, seeing none. Meetings and announcements. Ms. Sullivan-Weiskamp.
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission will meet here in these chambers on December 10th at 7 p.m.
Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Board of Zoning Appeals meeting is scheduled for November 26, 2024, 7 p.m. in these chambers. Thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will have our city tree lighting at 7 p.m. on Monday, December 2nd.
Still in meetings and announcements.
And if I may again, thank you. Thank you, Megan. Also, there'll be the Santa 5K on December the 7th at 9 a.m. and the village will be open, Vendors Village will be open from 9 to 3 p.m.
Still in meetings and announcements. Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess throw this to the rental committee. Look at your calendar. Typically, we go the off Wednesday, but is there a possibility that we go on, say, Tuesday, the 10th of December, to meet and give you time to go through, digest the...
We have plenty of time that night.
Oh, that's right.
Maybe we can do this offline.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be announced in the meeting. Other meetings and announcements. All right, next we'll go to communications in the audience. This is the second opportunity for anyone in the audience that would like to address council for any reason. Simply come to the podium, state your name and address, and you have up to 5 minutes to address council on any topic. The floor is now open. Second call. Third and final call. All right, I'm closing communications in the audience. Next, we'll move to a recap of legislative items and legislation in development. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Council, as you review your legislative summary, item 2 was addressed by Ordinance 57, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Tech Engineering Incorporated for completion of a Safe Streets for All study for the city of Springdale, Ohio. That passed with 7 affirmative votes after a second reading. Item 3 was addressed by Ordinance 58, 2024, also received a second reading, an ordinance approving a major modification of the Tri-County Mall Planned Unit Development and approving the preliminary development plan for the property located at 11700 Princeton Pike. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 4 was addressed by Ordinance 59, 2024, an ordinance declaring certain city property as surplus property and authorizing the sale, disposal, or transfer of said surplus property and declaring an emergency. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. All other items in development include item 1, an ordinance amending section 153.252 F6C of the Springdale Code of Ordinances regulating the husbandry of fowl, rabbits, and bees, and that is coming up at a later date. Item 5, Ordinance 60, 2024 received a first reading, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute a subrecipient grant agreement with the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, related to the 2024-2026 Hamilton County Community Development Block Grant Request Program. Item 6, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to amend the agreement with CT Consultants Incorporated to provide engineering services for the city of Springdale and declaring an emergency, will be before us on December 4th. Item 7, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement for design engineering for the East Kemper Road Improvements Phase 1 project for the city of Springdale, Ohio, will receive a reading on the 4th of December as well. The last item, item 8, several resolutions either confirming mayoral appointments and/or council appointments to various boards, commissions, and committees will be forthcoming at some point, unless there's anything else from administration.
And I understand Ms. Webster might be reaching out to Mr. Braun, so council can be on the lookout for that if she decides to bring something forward. Is there anything else? All right. Then with that, before I get to item 17, I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I hope everyone has a chance to meet with family and relax a bit before our next meeting. And with that, item 17.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. We're adjourned.